part 2 of, I think today we're gonna go with, we went pretty deep into real estate the last time just because I think it's a good mindset for people to be prepared for. But I really want to back up on the investor mindset and where I really like to go with my clients when they start thinking about buying houses and things like that, and understanding what that mindset looks like, because I think that mindset also helps with today's market and where it's going. But I wanted to address a couple of things that I think people have concerns with investing in today's market.
Okay.
We're talking about, another moratorium on evictions.
Yep.
We're talking about, the impact that it has on landlords and the economy, and how do you deal with that from the landlord's perspective, and how do you deal with it from the tenant's perspective?
I mean, I think it's super healthy for us to have a conversation about the landlord. I think that is a conversation that everybody's forgetting about, right?
Sure.
Don't get me wrong, tenants, all of us have hardship, right? But I think that there's so much conversation about protection of the tenant that the landlord doesn't really get their fair share in the spotlight there.
Right.
Other than just let these people live for free.
Well, I mean, that would be like telling the businesses, hey, moratorium on your rent for your commercial space.
Yeah. Or how about telling Starbucks just to give away coffee? Why do you need to charge for it?
Duh. Right. And I think that that's where some people, so here's my perspective on 2020 as a landlord. I own dozens of properties, and one of the things that I really believe has helped me through this time, by the way, I only had one tenant out of 40 have an issue. Some people were a little slow pay. They were making payment plans, but nobody played victim on the tenant side.
Okay, can I interject on that thought, right?
Sure.
On that right there, that stat? How unique is that statistic for most landlords, and what goes into you choosing a tenant? Because those are the two factors that I think give you that great statistic, is how careful you are choosing your tenants.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, and I think that this is investor mindset. I wanted to own the properties. I didn't want anything to do with them. Okay. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, when I hired the property management company to do it, it's the best investment that I've ever made in the relationship aspect, because I think that I'm a pretty nice guy when it comes down to it, and I don't want to be caught in the middle of pulling on my heartstrings for whatever. And there's a lot of legalities that come into managing the property, especially right now, with evictions and what you're doing and the strategies behind it. So, when I hired the property management company, which is my mom's company. My mom's pretty much retired, but, her staff maintains my portfolio, and I'm very grateful for what they do. And yes, there's a lot that goes into making sure that the right tenants are being vetted and going through that. And we had one tenant that wasn't paying rent, and they went about 3 months. And then all of a sudden they came in and they caught up all 4 months of rent.
That's awesome.
At one time. But
people have the right intentions, right? I mean,
they do.
Yeah, there's some basic necessities in life, and shelter is one of them.
Right. And I think if you're looking at it from perspective, it's if your tenants are late or they're not being able to pay on time or whatnot, I think working with somebody, and I think it goes from the tenants too. So if you're struggling paying your rent, I learned this when we were broke, when Wendy and I were broke in 2008, the best offense was best defense was a good offense, which was communication with the creditors.
Totally.
Hey, I can pay $25 a month to show them that I was doing something.
Yeah, you're still there.
I'm still here. I still want to make sure I'm still communicating.
Yeah.
Going and burying your head in the sand like an ostrich doesn't help.
Which is what most people do.
Right. They're like, oh, crap.
A lot of people, I should say.
And there was a lot of people, let's be honest, there was a lot of people that took advantage of it.
Agreed.
Because there was definitely, I think the percentage was, there was 3 to 5% of tenants that were taking advantage, in our property management stats. So out of 400 properties, there was a few people taking advantage. Most of them, here's the funny thing about the tenants. Most of them have a rent that is really good and really secure. And if at some point in time, remember, the moratorium is about eviction. Mm-hmm. The moratorium doesn't have anything to do with your lease ending.
Right.
Your lease ends, that's the lease's end. There's no eviction there when it comes down to
the lease is over. Yeah.
Right. The lease is over.
And then there's a right to renew.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, and also too, I mean, I think a lot of people that did take advantage of that didn't know what was going to come. I mean, like I know my nail girl, she's like, I took advantage of that because I needed to save money. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Now she's back at work now, but it's interesting when you think about that, what's happening for the consumer mindset when they decide to take advantage, what they're preparing for, or if they're just, skating out on bills.
So here's the interesting part about that is the people that I can understand the saving and doing that,
right?
Because they have the right to do it, and I get it. What they don't understand is they're still responsible for the rent.
Yep.
And they're still responsible for the collection damage that can be done for not working a way out to repay. You still owe the money.
Yep.
It's a reprieve, but you still owe the money. And some of the property management companies have really good collection companies. And if you really want to go down that road at the end of all that, it's going to cost you more.
Always, for sure.
Because getting out to go rent something in a market like we have right now, where the rental market is just as fierce as the sales market.
It's so true.
It really is. So let's just talk
rentals are rising fast.
Yes.
Faster.
Yes. So let's talk about the mindset. When I look at my first-time home buyers, I really try to encourage them that they are an investor. They are investing in real estate. They're first-timer at it.
Okay.
They're going to live in what they're investing in for a little while. A lot of the women find it funny when I tell them, do not nest in this house. Like, don't go snuggle up in the corner and get comfortable because you're not staying here very long.
Why do you only tell that to the ladies?
Because the guys are like,
The guys just go where the ladies tell them.
Exactly. We know how that works.
Yeah.
But, we recently had a conversation with a young couple in their late 20s, early 30s buying their first home. And I first started out with them, hey, I know you guys know a lot of real estate agents. You get a lot of advice from a lot of different people. I said, one of the things that I encourage you guys to do as we start this process is to think about this first house as something you're going to keep. You're having your first child, and I want you to think about when that child is 20, what it would do for that child and for your legacy if this house was paid off in 20 years and you owned it as a rental property and you were able to move from point A to point B. And a lot of times I get some pushback from people that have little kids or teenagers, more so on the little kids. Well, we don't, we want them to be in the same house and the schools. And so I always look at it and go, the kids really need my perspective. Okay, because I know how we did it with our kids. They need stability when they get to just about pre-teenage years. That's where they want to know home is. When they're little, they could care less. They're playing with their Legos and their Barbies. They could do it in any room at any house. So I really try to encourage them. And here's the reason why investor mindset. If you do it right now, this is where the perfect storm aligns up. If you were to keep the house you live in as a rental, you're getting ridiculous interest rates. The rents are increased. The rents have increased almost 30% in the last 3 years here.
Yeah, just 20% since May.
Right. So when you look at that, coupled with the interest rates and the price of homes and keeping something, you're creating some cash flow, potentially. You're creating a placeholder. You have another home that you can always go back to if you need to. That's what I find in having that mindset of it's a house. It's kind of like owning a car. You're going to have to put some tires on it. You're going to have to change the oil. You're going to have to maintain some of it. The only difference is the house is there and it's maintaining value. Now, here's where a lot of conversations come in. Well, what if it drops in value? Who gives a shit? It doesn't matter until you're selling it.
Exactly.
If the house is, it's covering its payment, it's doing some of those things, you're getting some tax benefits, some tax write-offs. What's the difference what it's worth?
Until you need to do something with it. Absolutely.
I honestly think that anybody that owns a rental property or an owner-occupied and the rates right now, the interest rate in that mortgage alone is worth its weight in gold.
Yep.
I mean, we've had some people lock in at 2.5% 30-year fixed.
It's crazy.
I want to buy the house and the loan.
It's so funny because, you know, as you're sharing all this, it makes me think, we were talking right before this, is that if we have this mindset to think of the home as shelter as opposed to it being a house or a home,
right?
You know, that can kind of shift the mindset to be thinking about it more shelter, like it's a basic necessity.
Here's the other mindset on it. This is my mindset. I learned this from watching what not to do from other landlords. I own a bunch of homes that provide families for people. They provide shelter for families. Some families, they don't want to buy because of where they're living or where their standards are, and they may not be able to buy, and that's okay. But I can tell you that I'm honored that these people live in my home and they're taking care of the home, and I'm maintaining it for the long term. So what does that do in my mindset? My average tenant is 5 to 6 years in my house. Okay.
That's a long time.
It's their home as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And I want to make sure and maintain that tenant relationship because I want them to be there longer term because it's saving me money by not having tenant turnover. Some of them are paying below market rent because they've been there so long. They're good tenants. They're good people. And I want them to be in my homes. And so that's another mindset of it's not just what you're collecting and the values and those things. Like I really pride ourselves in what we do to our homes. And some people are moving into almost brand new homes that have been remodeled.
Agree. I mean, they're nice.
They are nice.
Yeah.
But I want them to be there long term.
Right.
And I don't ever want them to feel lesser.
Because they're renting.
Because they're renting.
That's killer. That's a killer way to like instill a mindset because I think that a lot of people think of rentals as short term as opposed to that's what they do. Right?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like a lot of people don't put like the love and affection into the rental because they think of it as just, you know, short term. And if you actually put some love and affection into the rental, people will probably stay longer.
Right.
Because it's going to feel like a home as opposed to a rental.
My dad used to always say that we're in the people business, not in the housing business.
Yeah.
And when you own rental properties, if you first are in the people business, now people are going to let you down. Don't get me wrong. I have it.
100%.
You know, I'm not saying that everything's perfect, but I can say that I would say 99% of what I have in my rental properties are really good.
Yeah. Well, and probably when your leases come up and your tenants are tempted to be like, let's go see what else is out there. They're like, wow, we have a really nice rental. Like, how do we make sure to get this renewed? Right.
Yeah. So, you know,
I can't imagine that doesn't happen.
And here's what I think, you know, in that mindset, it might cost me more money during my time of ownership of those homes. But I feel that that's part of where, you know, I guess I'm blessed that I get to make sure that those homes and those people are taken care of as long as they're reciprocating, right? You're taking care of my home. You're paying your rent. I'm going to do the best things that I can to be a landlord. I mean, I remember some tenants that we bought a house and they had been there for 10 years. The previous landlord refused to do any repairs on it. Like 12-year-old carpet, house hadn't been painted, but they had been paying rent for 10, 12 years. And so when I bought, I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. They renewed their lease. We raised the price. I went in. I said, yes, I will replace all the carpet in the house. I will paint the entire interior of the house. You guys just have to move all your stuff out, right? That's your job. I'm not going to pay for that. You make that easy and we'll do that. But you're thinking about, well, are they going to stay here another 10 years? Is it worth that investment into that person to stay longer? So I think that that's just it's a mindset when you get into it. And you also have to have the mindset to not be emotionally attached to the house.
Yeah. Well, how do you, I mean, in terms of being a buyer, I mean, that's so hard to get them to switch gears into, first of all, let me help you strip away the emotion because that's all you know about buying a house is this big emotional hug, right? Or slap in the face in this market. Right. But so getting them to really think along those lines, I mean, what does that transition look like for somebody when you're helping them try to think like an investor? Because the emotion part's got to be the biggest thing to overcome. And then getting them to really wrap their arms around the fact that like, this is an investment.
Well, I think it's when you go into something, it's if I have the conversation up front, then they kind of know, hey, do some fun stuff to the house. Don't over improve it. but make the improvements that are going to make it tenant proof. And I say tenant proof from the standpoint of, hey, you're going to add tile floors. Great. You're going to put granite countertops in. Great. Because those are all things that are going to increase the value, increase the rent, and decrease the long-term liability of carpet wearing down, countertops being burned. Yes, that happens. Those types of things. So I always encourage them to do some of that stuff, but then knowing that, hey, yes, you're making memories here, but those memories are going to carry forward, and don't be so attached to, the front yard landscaping.
Yeah.
People always crack up. I'm like, I don't care if you park in the front yard, as long as there's not an HOA and you're taking care of the house.
Yeah.
The front yard's the least of my worries.
Yeah.
Don't park in the living room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when you're talking to people about having that investor mindset, do you actually teach them too that, like, look, there should be a certain amount of equity when you buy your property, like, out, from the front end of it? Like, do you even have to worry about any of those things, or is it just the mindset? Is there really any numbers that go into that whole idea?
Well, it goes back to talking about the mindset of, we talked in the last podcast about reducing some of your expectations.
Yep.
So many people want to come in and like, oh, I want a pool and I want all these things, and it doesn't fit the budget they can afford right now. Or are you making sacrifices for the future house? Yeah. Are you going to look back 10 years and thank your 20-year-old self for doing those things at 30, rather than, oh, well, now I'm 30 and I've owned one house for the last 10 years when I could have done this.
Yeah.
It's conversation that I'm working with Kyle on my team and our producer over here.
Hi, Kyle.
Hey, I know that you guys want to go and buy this nice house right now, but reduce the expectations knowing that you're going to level up in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it might be 12 months depending on how fast we ramp this up. But don't get so set like this is our forever home.
How do you help people reconcile, the number of must-haves, right? I mean, on average, does a buyer come in with like, I've got 10 must-haves on a house. Like, what's that look like? And then what does it end up like? Like, what do you got to give up? How many things am I allowed to have if I want to buy a new house?
It's you can have all those things if you want to move to Buckeye for under $200,000.
But I'm imagining, like, your typical consumer, they're going to ask for a number of things, right? I need to have a garage. I need to have a pool. I need to have
the difference is needs and wants.
Okay. So that's the language. Like, what do you need and what do you want?
But again, it goes back to the mindset of, are you prepared to think about that as an investment property, or are you wanting to really buy your forever home? Look, the investment stuff is not for everybody.
Right.
And not everybody takes that advice, and that's okay. But my goal is at least they know about it.
Yeah.
And they've thought about it.
Well, I feel like that advice, like, I'm putting myself in those shoes as your buyer, like, that will help me better, like, fine tune my needs list with an investor mindset, like, to realize that, okay, if there's these 10 things that I really want, what do I really need, in terms of seeing this as a place I can live for a certain amount of time and eventually make it part of my wealth building.
Right.
Right. But I'm imagining that a lot of people come to the table with a pretty long grocery list of the things that they want in a house.
Oh, I can tell you the biggest thing that most people are like, well, I want a pool.
Oh, really?
Okay, let's talk about a pool.
I want a fireplace. Living in Phoenix.
That's an easy, like, that's a cheap fix right there. I'll get you a fireplace and an electric fan to plug in. But it's the pool. I just recently went through and, okay, so we've lived in our house for 8 years. We have a pool. We had it replastered. The only person that uses the pool is the pool guy.
Not the dogs.
No, the dogs don't even swim. The only person that does anything with the pool is the pool guy. He gets paid every month to maintain it. I think the only time I use it is to push the kids in when it's cold. But nobody really swims out. Now, some families, they spend a lot of time out there. When my kids were younger, we spent a ton of time in the pool. But you have to start thinking about, is it worth the expense?
Right.
Pools can be expensive when they break, when you service them, the utilities on
water,
power to run the pump. So people don't put all that into perspective.
Yeah. Interesting.
And whether or not, pools are not good on investors. So I always go through, investor mindset. So there's two different things. Investor mindset from when I call it owner occupied jumping. Okay. I did a post in Facebook about the number one thing that's holding people back from investing in real estate. And the number one thing was money. I don't have the money. It's not money, it's mindset. Okay? It's the mindset of how you do it. Like, I want to do this. How do I do it? If money was the issue, you're not reaching out and figuring out, well, is money really the issue, or is there some other strategy that can get there?
Right.
Okay. So I remember one of my nieces like, well, money. Well, hey, niece, you just bought a house a year ago. You don't need money. You need to have the strategy to go from point A to point B, which means you keep this house and you buy the next one with that 3 to 5% down. And there's a strategy to get there. And if you keep doing this, in 5 years or 10 years, you could own $1 million worth of real estate by going from one house to the next,
right,
and being willing to move. Now, you don't have the money to do it, but you have the wherewithal to move. You can physically move, which means every time you physically move, you're saving putting 20% down on investment property. So what's that move worth?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
instead of a 20% down payment.
Instead of a 20%.
Yeah.
You can go be owner occupied at 5% down conventional and keep that home and move to the next one.
Right.
You know, there's qualifying, there's other things that work into it, but that is the easiest way to obtain real estate with low to no money down. Now, the other thing when you go into the investment mindset is, hey, if you're doing the owner occupant jumping, are you buying the homes that are going to make the best rentals? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So are you buying homes with pools, and are you buying condos? And those are all things that, you know, when I look at investor mindset, I always teach the buy box. What is my portfolio built out of? It's built out of smaller homes under 2,000 square feet. There are no tile roofs. They are typically single level, single AC unit, no pools, no condos. The reason for that buy box is that I'm trying to reduce my long-term liabilities in a house. Okay. HOAs, they're a waste of money. You know, I've told people, I'm like, you can own a house, even if it's a minimal HOA. It seems minimal, $30, $40 a month. Okay. That's $18,000 that you pissed away at the end of 30 years. And that doesn't include any additional management or cost from fines, liens, all the things the HOA is telling you to do.
Right.
Okay. I'd rather have stuff that's older outside of HOAs. I don't like tile roofs. Part of it is because tile roofs are no different than comp shingle roofs. The tile's the pretty part. The underlayment has to be replaced every 20 to 30 years. And comp shingles actually last longer than that. And comp shingles obviously get damaged by hail, which was a really good thing in 2010 for a lot of investors and homeowners when they got their roofs replaced. And the smaller, you know, if it's under 2,000 square feet, it's typically a 3-4 bedroom. You only have one AC unit. These are people, the investors' two biggest concerns, the roof and the AC. If you have to replace an AC unit on that house, it's about $4,000 to $5,000. You're only going to replace it once.
Yeah.
In that time that you own it. The roof, same thing. Those are the two biggest kickers when it comes down to it. So, investor mindset also has to do with where are you investing in? Okay. We invest in the Phoenix market, and the reason I stay here is because I know it.
Right.
It's my backyard. I know I don't own investments anywhere else other than up in Munns Park and in Flagstaff and down here in Phoenix. Reason being, again, because I know it and I can touch the market and I know what it's doing. I know a lot of people that invest all over the country. Good for them. It's not my jam. Because I've seen people take it in the shorts for investing with somebody they didn't really know that thought it was going to be a good idea. But I think it's important to understand it and know what you can afford, because rental properties cost money. They're not always going to cash flow. And it depends. People are like, well, I want to cash flow. Then you have to put a lot more money down. Right. If you want to cash flow. So.
Or live in it.
Right.
And then.
Right.
Yeah.
So what else can I talk about with the investor mindset? Because I can go in 100 different directions.
Well, I think there's a simplicity about it that can be easily remembered. Is just that even if you're the primary resident or you're really going into this as an investor, just to have the mindset, right? So what's important in terms of long term, and can I live in it? Right. I feel like if you live in it, it makes so much sense, because you could live into that property for a year to 5 years, and you're building equity. So I think I just never thought about it as like, let's say I'm a first time home buyer, to really prepare myself with a mindset of an investment. Right? Like, let me think of this as shelter as opposed to my dream home or my dream house.
And some people would tell you, so here's probably the biggest thing. Dave Ramsey, he's amazing when it comes down to the financial advice, things like that. There's some things I don't see eye to eye on it, but he gives some great advice. I have one of my great mentors and friends, Chris Harder, does a podcast called For the Love of Money. The dude has been so against homeownership for so many years. He finally bought a house here in Paradise Valley. He's still kind of against it, but it had to do with the market and the timing, and he came from California. But here's the kicker. Dave Ramsey, Chris, some of these other guys, like even Grant Cardone, he's like, ownership, you need to rent where you live and own what you rent. Depends on your mentality.
True.
If I'm living in one of my rentals and I'm fixing it up to make it a rental, then I'm not considering myself homeowner.
Right.
Now,
You're an investor.
Right now, I'm totally, and because they say it's a liability, it's not an asset. And the reason they say it's liability, not an asset, is because you're pouring money into it.
Interesting.
We're getting ready to pump $50,000 into our backyard right now. We're redoing something. Total liability. It is not an asset. I'm spending money on something. Now, I'm spending money that I want to invest in my memories, my family, my stuff.
Right.
That's my return. That's my choice.
Well, it also depends on the status of the investment at the time, right?
Correct.
So you could put $50,000 into something, and if the worth of the property is already gained much more than what's owed on it, it's still, I don't see how that could be a liability.
Right.
Yeah.
But
and I think a lot of people, I think California is this big renter mentality there because you can't touch property. Sure. The rentals and the quality of the property compared to what you can buy are really different.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
But it's so interesting that I never thought about it, but it's true. There are a lot of business people that are not owners.
What do you mean?
They don't like owning homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they believe that, you should rent it, let somebody else take care of it, which I understand. I think it's actually a really valid point right now because when you look at it in owning a house versus renting, your life is subject to change based on somebody else's circumstances.
Yeah.
Right? Because the landlord can all of a sudden be out of money and decide, hey, I'm selling the house, you're out.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, what does that do to them? I never wanted to be subject to, somebody else's circumstances is going to determine where my family and I have to go. And I think a lot of renters do end up being in that position, especially like the last couple of years. What happens when somebody's rented a house? I had to do this recently. We bought a house. The landlord's owned for like 11 years. It's disgusting. Tenants have been there for 11 years. And they were only paying $900 a month in rent. Well, the seller sold it to me, and now I have to make the hard decision.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are not taking care of the house, and they weren't willing to pay market rent. They weren't even willing to increase their rent, which now they're subject to lifestyle change, and I don't even know. And sometimes it's really hard for me on that business decision. Now, if I had gone into that house and the house is in really good shape and good people and, not that they were bad people, but the way they were living in the house did not make me feel comfortable about how they would take care of my asset.
100%.
So that was one of the reasons when I started looking at homeownership, I never wanted to be subject to somebody else's circumstances.
Right. Well, it's interesting really to think even about what the investor mindset is about, because when I think about being an investor, to me, it's just real estate. That's the only thing that pops into my mind, right? So if you're an investor, what are you investing in if it's not real estate in terms of accessibility and barrier to entry, right? I mean, like you could invest in businesses, you could be, venture capitalist. There's all kinds of things you can quote unquote invest in. But I think that the most accessible element of an investor mindset is real estate.
Okay. And I think that takes us into the next thing that I think we should talk about, because I love the subject. And I invest in a lot of real estate, but I also invest a ton of money into myself.
Okay.
You know, coaching, time, those types of things. And I think we can kind of go, along that subject and segue into that. So to wrap this up on the investor mindset, I think you have to realize, are you getting the right guidance? Are you seeking out the right people? Are you asking the right questions? And are you able to sacrifice now for something greater later? I mean, what does Dave Ramsey say? Live like nobody else now so you can live like nobody else later.
Right.
If Kyle, sorry, I'm using you as an example again, because you're here, it's easier. If Kyle decides that, hey, we're having a good year, we want to buy a $500,000 house, it's going to be our forever home, we just want to be here. Cool. Great. I'm glad you're going to do that. I hope you enjoy the house. Is Kyle going to be pissed off at the end of 2022 when the one house he bought, or let's just go 10 years out, is he going to be pissed off that he only had one house and he didn't have 5 houses that appreciated?
Yeah.
That were locked in, that were being paid down? Because most people, they don't think in that term of, I can be an investor. You don't need a bunch of money. You do need to have some safety nets. Maybe you need to have a partner. That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. I mean, exit strategy should be an important element to any of those kinds of choices, right? So that's what you're talking about there. Safety net is, what's my exit strategy if this doesn't go the way that I want it to?
Right.
But I think, too, you talk about guidance, which is huge. But I think for me, like, my biggest takeaway here is just opening my eyes to being an investor. So instead of thinking about everything as buying it as your house or your home, think about it as an investment. And so being open to that mindset, and then the guidance, and, we've got 2 ears for a reason.
Exactly. So I'm going to wrap it up with this.
Our fireside chat.
In real estate, if you look over the last 20 going into 21 years, you look at our market and you look at what it's done. And if you had bought a house in the year 2000 and you could afford it. I'm just going to use my first house as an example. I was paying $997 a month. Even if I never refinanced it, my interest rate was 7%, 7.25%, whatever it was back then. It was stupid. If I had just let that sit and I never touched, I never refinanced, I never did anything, it'd be 22 years paid off. It would have seen an up and down. Mm-hmm. And the house is worth, I paid $100 for it in 2000. And again, even with a 7% interest rate, it would have been worth $300,000 now, and I would have owed 8 more years on it. And by the way, the rent back then when I first rented it out was around $1,000 a month. Over that course of time, the rent right now is about $1,700 a month on that house. So even with a 7% interest rate, it'd still be cash flowing. Yeah. If I had never touched it, but if I would have had somebody give me a little bit more strategy and I thought the way I do now, would have been much different rather than just selling it and outright cashing out, making $100,000.
Right.
So I see that because it's a long-term play and you have to get comfortable knowing that it's just going to sit there and turn, so that when you get to a point of, I think here's the last thing I would say about it. The investment mindset is, especially when it comes down to real estate or retirement, what's a number on a monthly basis that you'd be comfortable retiring with that something might produce? So I talked to somebody recently, like, hey, we're going to get about $2,600 in pension. And that between that and Social Security, that would make us comfortable. We wouldn't have to change our lifestyle. Okay, what if in the same time frame they had bought a couple of houses that now produce $3,000 or $4,000 a month, and they own the properties free and clear? What does that do for retirement? What does one house that's owned free and clear producing $2,000 a month do for retirement? That's the goal. That's the end goal. It's not about right now. We all have jobs. We all have incomes. I don't look at the houses. They're not producing an income for me right now.
Right.
That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for them to produce 20 years from now when I don't want to work, although I kind of like what I do. So who knows? We'll still be sitting here in 10 years.
That'll be fun.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining us. Absolutely love doing this podcast. I would love it if you guys would share, comment in your Instagram stories. Totally. I'm Steve D. Valentine on Instagram, and
Burns pics
because she likes to post pictures. But it would mean the world to us if you guys leave a 5-star review and or share with your friends, and just kind of keep tuning in. We're going to go all over the place. I really enjoy the conversation. So peace out. See you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks.